All right, so today we're going to be cracking open Stephen Bartlett's Diary of a CEO.
Okay.
And it's really all about, you know, extracting some wisdom on achieving exceptional things.
Yeah.
Things that kind of make you think like, oh, wow, I wish I'd heard this sooner.
Yeah, it's fascinating because he kind of, instead of focusing on just like business tactics or, things that are going to be outdated in 2 years, he really focuses on these like timeless principles
Right.
for building like remarkable achievements that you can apply to like any field, really.
Yeah. And one of the first things that really kind of jumped out at me was this concept of the 5 buckets.
Okay.
What do you make of this, and how can our listener start to apply it to their own life?
So the 5 buckets, knowledge, skills, network, resources, and reputation, are kind of like ingredients for success, right?
Yeah.
The fuller your buckets, the more you could accomplish. But here's the kicker. He really emphasizes that, pouring your energy into those first 2 buckets, like knowledge and skills, gives you the biggest bang for your buck. Those are like the foundation for everything else.
Total sense. It's like trying to build a house without a solid foundation. It's just not going to work.
Exactly.
You can't expect a strong network to just appear if you haven't cultivated the knowledge and skills to even attract those connections in the first place.
Exactly. And he actually shares a story about seeking advice from Radhanath Swami, who's like this spiritual leader.
Okay.
And he was kind of grappling with this decision of like, should I, build my business? Should I go back to Africa and help people?
Right.
He felt this like pull in 2 directions, and he was like, what do I do? And he asked for his advice, and the Swami said, an empty bucket cannot pour water.
Wow. I like that.
It's so powerful.
That's the dilemma a lot of us face, balancing ambition with this desire to make a difference.
Totally.
So what did that advice mean for Stephen Bartlett, and how could our listener learn from this?
Basically, the message was like, you need to fill your own buckets first. Gain the knowledge, build the skills, accumulate resources, and then you can try to, save the world or whatever it is that you're called to do.
I think a lot of people struggle with that.
Yeah.
Feeling like they need to be ready before pursuing their goals.
Right.
But maybe that's the wrong approach.
Yeah, you've hit on a really important point. I think it's really easy to fall into that trap of like waiting for the perfect time or feeling like you need to have everything figured out before you start. But the truth is, there's no such thing as perfect. You'll never have all the answers up front.
Right.
Sometimes you just got to dive in and start filling those buckets.
It's that whole learn by doing philosophy, right? You can read all the books, you can attend all the workshops, but nothing beats real world experience.
100%. And even if things don't go as planned, even if you face setbacks or failures, those experiences are still filling your knowledge bucket. They're teaching you valuable lessons that you can apply to future endeavors.
It's like that saying, every master was once a disaster.
Uh-huh.
Bartlett actually shares this cautionary tale about this 21-year-old named Richard who landed a high-paying CEO position, but it sounds like he kind of skipped a few steps.
Yeah.
What can we learn from Richard's story?
So Richard was basically, seduced by the allure of this fancy title and this like big paycheck.
Right.
But he lacked the knowledge and skills to lead effectively. His company eventually crashed and he was left jobless. And the takeaway is that, skipping those crucial first 2 buckets can lead to disaster.
It's a stark reminder that true success is built on this foundation of knowledge and skills.
Right.
Those are the things that stay with you. Even if you lose your network, you lose your resources, even your reputation.
Exactly.
They're your lifeline during those inevitable career storms, life's curveballs.
Precisely. And this leads us perfectly into the next principle, the power of teaching. It's something I found so helpful in my own journey, especially because I used to have terrible stage fright.
Oh, really?
It's hard to imagine now, right?
It's hard to imagine you being afraid of public speaking.
I know, but it's true. And what helped me overcome it was teaching and forcing myself to speak publicly.
Oh, wow.
I realized that the best way to conquer a fear is to confront it head on.
Yeah.
And each time I put myself in that uncomfortable situation, I gained a little more confidence and my skills as a speaker grew.
And there's this technique that really kind of embodies that whole approach.
Yeah.
It's called the Feynman technique.
Right.
Named after physicist Richard Feynman. And it's just this powerful tool for mastering any subject.
Absolutely. The gist is that you explain a concept as if you were teaching it to a child. And this forces you to break it down, use clear language, and identify gaps in your own understanding.
Right.
Because if you can't explain it simply, you probably don't get it yourself.
Yeah, it reminds me of that quote, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough.
Exactly.
And when it comes to, solidifying knowledge and accelerating your learning, Bartlett highlights the importance of having skin in the game. What do you think he means by that, and how can our listener apply this concept to their own goals?
So having skin in the game is about creating a sense of urgency and accountability, raising the stakes.
Yeah.
Imagine telling your friends you're going to run a marathon.
Right.
You're way more likely to train because you don't want to let them down.
Yeah, you're accountable.
Exactly. It's a powerful motivator. Do you have any skin in the game right now for your goals?
Or absolutely. For me, it's about publicly committing to my goals. By sharing my intentions with others, I create a sense of accountability that keeps me, motivated and focused.
Love it.
But let's loop this back to the 5 buckets. How does teaching play into all of this?
So teaching forces you to identify gaps in your knowledge and areas where you need to hone your skills. It's like a continuous cycle of learning, refining, and deepening your understanding.
Okay.
Plus, when you share that knowledge, you're not only solidifying your own grasp of the material, but you're also creating value for others, which can open up all sorts of new opportunities.
So it's like this beautiful feedback loop where teaching a way to fill those first 2 buckets can actually help you fill the remaining buckets as well.
Exactly. It's all interconnected. Now, how about we shift gears and explore another crucial principle that Bartlett highlights?
Yeah.
The art of not arguing.
Oh, the art of not arguing. I think we could all use a little help in that department. Witnessing those explosive arguments between my parents as a kid really left a mark on me.
Yeah.
And it took me a while to realize I was repeating those same patterns in my own relationships.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah.
We've all been there, but what's really intriguing is that science actually backs up why arguing can be so counterproductive.
Okay.
So Bartlett cites neuroscientist Professor Tali Sharot,
Okay.
who found that arguing actually triggers this defensive response in the brain, essentially shutting down the other person's ability to even consider your viewpoint.
Oh, wow. So it's almost like we're putting up walls instead of building bridges.
Exactly.
So if arguing isn't the way to go, how do we have productive conversations when we disagree?
So Sharot suggests this more subtle approach, finding common ground and acknowledging points of agreement before presenting differing viewpoints.
Okay.
So instead of launching into a full-blown debate, you kind of start by creating a sense of understanding.
It makes sense. Instead of saying you're wrong, you could say something like, I understand where you're coming from, but have you considered...
Exactly.
It feels less confrontational.
Exactly. And that sets the stage for a more open and receptive conversation.
Right.
Bartlett also brings in communication experts, Julian Treasure and Paul Brunson, who emphasize active listening.
Right.
Making the other person feel heard and understood can really de-escalate a situation.
Oh, yeah. I can definitely attest to that. When I genuinely focus on listening to the other person's perspective, even if I don't agree with them, it just tends to calm things down. That helps me understand where they're coming from, which can sometimes lead to finding that common ground we talked about.
It's about creating a space for dialogue, not a battleground. But shifting gears a bit, Bartlett also delves into this really fascinating concept, the illusion of choice and beliefs.
Okay.
And he starts with this thought experiment. Imagine a loved one is held at gunpoint.
Okay.
And the only way to save them is to genuinely believe that the terrorist is Jesus.
That's pretty intense, but I see where you're going with this.
Right. Could we actually choose to believe something so outlandish, even with those stakes?
Right.
It makes you question how much control we really have over our beliefs.
So there's this disconnect between our perceived ability to choose our beliefs and our actual capacity to do so, especially in these really extreme situations.
Totally.
It makes you wonder where our beliefs actually come from then.
So Bartlett explains that while beliefs are formed based on evidence, that evidence is filtered through our biases and experiences.
Right.
It's not just about the facts, but how we interpret them through our own unique lenses.
That explains why we see things like flat earthers or people clinging to conspiracy theories despite mountains of evidence, debunking them.
Exactly. Beliefs can be incredibly sticky, even when they're demonstrably false.
Right.
And the stickiness is partly due to the influence of authority figures.
Okay.
If you're a huge Messi fan and he endorses Adidas over Nike, you're more likely to believe Adidas is superior even without trying both.
Right. It's like we outsource our belief-forming process to people we see as experts.
Yeah.
But in a world overflowing with information, how do we know what to believe?
Right.
And if we can't argue people out of their beliefs, how can we effectively change minds?
So Bartlett argues that attacking someone's beliefs is rarely effective.
Okay.
Instead, you need to introduce new, compelling evidence that aligns with their desired belief.
Okay.
He uses the example of trying to convince a flat earther that the Earth is round,
Right.
showing them NASA photos won't work because they don't trust the source.
So how do you bridge the gap between their existing belief and the new evidence you're presenting?
So Professor Charrette's research offers some insight. She identifies 4 factors that determine whether new evidence can actually change a belief:
Okay.
the strength of the old and new evidence, and the individual's confidence in both.
Okay.
But here's another really fascinating layer. People are more likely to change their minds when the counter-evidence is something they want to hear.
So our desires can actually influence our beliefs.
It seems so.
Wow.
Think about studies where people were told they were more attractive
Okay.
or resistant to diseases than they thought.
Right.
They readily accepted this information because it aligned with their desire to see themselves positively.
That's incredible. It seems like appealing to people's existing desires could be a more effective way to introduce new ideas.
Totally. Bartlett also mentions this really intriguing tactic of detailed self-examination.
Okay.
He cites the study where graduate students had to explain the mechanics of a toilet. And after struggling to articulate this seemingly simple concept, they significantly lowered their initial confidence in their understanding.
So by unpacking their assumptions, the researchers exposed gaps in their knowledge, leading to a shift in belief.
Exactly. Bartlett argues this same principle can be applied to dismantling limiting beliefs about ourselves. If someone believes they're worthless, challenge them to explain why in detail.
Right.
By scrutinizing those beliefs, you create space for them to reconsider their validity.
It's like shining a light on those negative beliefs and exposing them to the light of reason.
Exactly.
It encourages self-reflection and challenges those limiting narratives we sometimes create for ourselves.
100%. And this ties back to building knowledge and skills.
Right.
The more we learn, the more evidence we gather that can challenge those limiting beliefs and empower us to rewrite our self-stories.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, Bartlett shares this really captivating story about boxer Chris Eubank Jr.
Oh, I love a good sports story.
Yeah.
Give us the rundown.
He describes this brutal sparring match he had in Cuba before turning pro.
Okay.
He was up against this Cuban Olympic heavyweight twice his size,
What?
who was just pummeling him. He was knocked off the platform, landed hard, and was in agonizing pain.
It just sounds like he was ready to tap out.
With his father watching, he chose to get back up and fight for 2 more rounds.
Wow.
He said he couldn't live with himself if he quit.
That's serious grit.
And that experience solidified his belief in his ability to persevere through anything.
Yeah.
He realized he could endure far more than he thought possible.
So even though it was brutal,
Yeah.
it became this pivotal moment in shaping his self-story.
Totally. Bartlett connects us to a study at West Point. Researchers found that grit, the perseverance and passion for long-term goals, was the strongest predictor of success,
Interesting.
even more than intelligence or physical ability.
I love it. It's about having that inner drive and resilience to keep going when things get tough.
Exactly. It's not just about talent, but the mental fortitude to stick with it.
Yeah.
And this ties back to Eubank Jr.'s experience. That sparring match was his grit test. But Bartlett also delves into how our self-stories are shaped by external factors, particularly negative stereotypes.
Oh, this is such a crucial point. It reminds me of being told I couldn't swim because I was Black.
Wow.
And that seemingly harmless comment had a profound impact on me. I internalized that stereotype and believed I was incapable of learning,
Wow.
only realizing later how unfounded that belief was.
That's a perfect illustration of how negative stereotypes can limit our potential best. Bartlett cites studies demonstrating stereotype threat. In one current, Black students who were asked about their race before a vocabulary test performed worse than those who weren't, simply because they were reminded of negative stereotypes associated with their race.
So just being aware of a stereotype can negatively impact performance.
Exactly. Another study looked at the myth that women are worse at math.
Yep.
Women exposed to the stereotype before a math test performed worse than those who weren't.
Wow.
It shows how deeply these stereotypes can affect us even subconsciously.
It's like they were carrying the weight of those negative expectations on their shoulders.
Right. And researchers wondered, could shedding their identity impact performance? They had women take a math test with some using male pseudonyms.
Wow.
The results were astounding. The women with male names performed just as well as the men, significantly outperforming those who used their real names.
Simply changing their name and therefore their perceived identity leveled the playing field.
Exactly.
It's like they were rewriting their self-stories in real time.
It highlights the power of self-belief and how societal biases can shape our narratives. While we can't always control the stereotypes we encounter, we can actively challenge them, rewrite those narratives, and create more empowering beliefs about ourselves.
It's a reminder that we have more agency than we think, and that we can define ourselves and our potential even in the face of those biases. We need to create environments that challenge negative stereotypes and empower individuals to embrace their unique identities and abilities.
100%. But let's shift gears and explore the difference between leaning in and leaning out.
All ears, break it down for us.
So Bartlett defines leaning out as the arrogant refusal to listen, learn, and pay attention to new information, especially when it challenges our identity or expertise. Remember that record store CEO who dismissed digital music as a fad and ultimately went bankrupt.
He was so stuck in his ways, he couldn't see the revolution happening right before his eyes.
Classic example of leaning out.
Yeah.
And this resistance often stems from cognitive dissonance, that discomfort we feel when our beliefs and behaviors clash.
Right.
It's easier to cling to outdated beliefs than face the discomfort of changing our minds.
That explains why some tech executives famously underestimated the potential of the internet personal communicators. Even the iPhone.
Right.
They were leaning out, refusing to acknowledge the disruptive forces reshaping their world.
Bartlett even shares a personal anecdote about facing ridicule when he started his social media marketing company.
Oh, really?
The established media saw him as a threat and leaned out instead of adapting.
Wow.
They dismissed social media as a fad, just like that record store CEO with digital music.
And look where we are now. It seems like the most disruptive ideas often face the most resistance initially.
That resistance often comes from a fear of the unknown.
Yeah.
When something challenges our understanding, it's easier to dismiss it than grapple with uncertainty.
Right.
Bartlett challenges us to embrace the weird, the different, the challenging.
Yeah.
He believes that disruptive innovations are often initially criticized precisely because they force us to confront our cognitive dissonance.
So instead of shutting down when we encounter something new or different, we should lean in, be curious, ask questions,
Yes.
and explore those new perspectives.
Exactly. And this brings us to another powerful principle, the power of asking questions.
Oh, I'm a huge believer in this. Bartlett's anecdote about Ronald Reagan using a single question to sway public opinion during the 1980 election really resonated with me.
Remind me about that. What was the question?
So Reagan was up against incumbent President Jimmy Carter, and the economy was a mess.
Right.
Instead of bombarding voters with statistics, Reagan asked a simple but powerful question. Are you better off than you were 4 years ago?
It's a brilliant example of using a question to shift perspectives and influence behavior instead of making statements.
And Bartlett explains that asking questions can be more effective, especially when the facts are on your side. He highlights research showing that asking someone about their future behavior can actually increase the likelihood of them doing it.
Oh, wow.
It's like planting a seed.
Interesting.
And Bartlett also shares an insight about how asking yes or no questions can create cognitive dissonance
Okay.
and motivate action. Remember my personal assistant, Sophie, who always said she was going to the gym on Mondays?
Yes, Sophie, the queen of good intentions.
But never actually went.
Right.
So instead of accepting her excuses, Bartlett suggests I could have asked, did you go to the gym on Monday?
Oh.
And that would have forced her to confront the gap between her words and actions,
Right.
creating that cognitive dissonance.
She'd either have to start going to the gym or admit she wasn't truthful.
Yeah, exactly. A brilliant way to use questions to hold ourselves and others accountable.
Totally. Bartlett even uses this technique on himself. He was running up a steep hill in Portugal
Oh, wow.
and asked himself, will you keep running without stopping?
Wow.
Answering yes gave him the mental boost to push through.
Sometimes a simple question can be all it takes to spark action.
Absolutely.
And this idea of internal dialogue as a motivator leads perfectly into our final principle, prioritizing health. It's like we have this inner coach who can help us overcome challenges and reach our goals just by asking the right questions.
Totally. And speaking of setting ourselves up for success, Bartlett wraps up with a principle that really resonated with me, prioritizing health. It's the foundation for everything. He even quotes Warren Buffett, who compares our bodies and minds to a car that we must drive for a lifetime.
Okay.
And just like we wouldn't neglect maintaining our car, we shouldn't neglect our physical and mental well-being.
That's such a good analogy. Before COVID-19, I was so obsessed with aesthetics, like working out mainly for a six-pack.
Yeah.
but the pandemic really shifted my perspective.
It was a wake-up call for a lot of people, I think, including myself.
Yeah,
COVID-19 really forced us to confront our mortality and reevaluate what truly matters.
totally.
And it brought to light this undeniable link between health and resilience, especially during challenging times.
Exactly. It became crystal clear that everything else, my work relationships, happiness,
Yeah.
all of it hinged on my health.
Yeah.
It's like health is the table upon which everything else in life rests.
I love that.
If that table collapses, everything on top comes crashing down.
Such a powerful visual. Bartlett even mentions research highlighting the link between obesity and severe COVID-19 complications.
Right.
It really underscored how neglecting our health can leave us vulnerable in the face of these unexpected challenges.
So like trying to run a marathon on an empty tank.
Yeah.
You're setting yourself up for failure. Bartlett shares his own personal journey with prioritizing health.
Yeah.
Making changes to his diet, incorporating more exercise, focusing on hydration.
Yeah, and he emphasizes that these changes didn't just improve his physical health. They also had this positive ripple effect on his energy levels, sleep-mood relationships, even his work performance.
It's amazing how interconnected everything is. Taking care of our physical health can truly transform every aspect of our lives.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we wrap up this deep dive into Diary of a CEO, let's recap the key insights for our listener.
Okay, so we explored the importance of filling the right buckets, starting with knowledge and skills as the foundation for success. We also learned how teaching can accelerate learning and how having skin in the game can boost motivation.
We uncovered the art of not arguing, emphasizing finding common ground and active listening, and we delved into the nature of beliefs, exploring how they are formed and how to effectively introduce new evidence to shift perspectives.
We also highlighted the dangers of leaning out and encouraged embracing the weird, the different, and the challenging. We explored the power of asking questions to influence behavior and motivate action.
And finally, we underscored the crucial role of prioritizing health as the bedrock for achieving lasting success in all areas of life.
Yes.
It's a reminder that investing in our well-being is one of the most powerful investments we can make.
So much great stuff packed into Bartlett's Diary of a CEO. But before we sign off, let's leave our listener with one final thought to ponder, building on what we discussed.
Absolutely. If you could create a self-story that would guarantee your success, what would it say about you and the actions you take each day?
That's a question worth reflecting on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep striving for those exceptional achievements.